The morning sun glinted off the chrome cleats of my 36-foot sailboat as I sipped coffee on the deck, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the hull. 23 years I'd called Marina Bay my home port, and not once had anyone questioned my right to slip 47. But as I watched a woman in a crisp white blazer storm down the dock toward me, clipboard clutched like a weapon, I had no idea my peaceful retirement was about to become a war zone. "Excuse me," the voice cut through the morning calm like a foghorn. "Are you aware that this boat slip is in violation of our Homeowners Association regulations?" I set down my coffee mug and studied the woman before me. Mid-50s, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, despite the harbor breeze, and the kind of rigid posture that screamed middle management. Her blazer bore a small golden pin reading HOA Board President in bold letters. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake," I replied, standing slowly. "I'm David Chen, and I have been renting this slip from Marina Bay for over 2 decades. The marina isn't even part of any HOA." She flipped through her clipboard with theatrical precision. "Actually, Mr. Chen, as of last month, the Harbor Point Homeowners Association has expanded our jurisdiction to include oversight of all waterfront activities that impact our community's property values and aesthetic standards." The absurdity of it hit me like a rogue wave. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a private marina. You can't just declare jurisdiction over it." "I most certainly can." She thrust a laminated document toward me. "I'm Margaret Whitmore, HOA President, and according to Section 12.7 of our revised bylaws, any watercraft visible from our residential properties must comply with our marine vessel standards. Your boat, frankly, is an eyesore." I stared at my pristine sailboat, her white fiberglass hull gleaming, her brass fittings polished to perfection. An eyesore? The color scheme is entirely wrong for our coastal aesthetic vision. Plus, these older boats simply don't project the image we want for Harbor Point. Margaret's voice dripped with the kind of authority that comes from never being challenged. "You'll need to relocate immediately." "And if I refuse?" Her smile was razor thin. "Then we'll explore other options." As she clicked away on her designer heels, I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret Whitmore's other options were going to be far worse than I imagined. But what I didn't know was that she'd already made 3 phone calls before approaching my boat. First escalation. 2 days later, I arrived at the marina to find a bright orange citation taped to my mast. The wind had picked up and storm clouds gathered overhead as I read the ridiculous document aloud to myself. Notice of maritime aesthetic violation. Fine, $250. Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in escalated enforcement action. Can you believe this garbage? I called out to Pete, the marina's grizzled harbor master, as he approached with his morning inspection checklist. Pete shook his weathered head. "Dave, I gotta tell you, this lady's been calling the marina office every day. Yesterday, she showed up with some guy in a suit, claimed they were doing a compliance assessment of our facilities." "What kind of compliance assessment?" "Hell if I know. But they were taking pictures, measuring distances, checking our permits." Pete lit a cigarette and took a long drag. "Never seen anything like it in 30 years running this place." That afternoon, I drove to the Harbor Point Community Center for the monthly HOA meeting. The conference room smelled of cheap coffee and the kind of industrial carpet that had seen better decades. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret presided from behind a folding table, like a queen holding court. When she spotted me entering, her eyes narrowed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a visitor tonight. This is Mr. Chen, the owner of the non-compliant vessel we discussed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I raised my hand. "I'd like to address the board about this citation." "The floor recognizes Mr. Chen. 2 minutes." I stood and faced the room. My boat has been moored at Marina Bay for 23 years without incident. I pay my slip fees on time, maintain my vessel properly, and have never caused any problems. This citation is not only baseless, it's harassment. Margaret's voice cut through the air. Mr. Chen, your boat is clearly visible from 17 different homes in our community. Property values in waterfront communities can drop significantly due to unsightly marine vessels. We're simply protecting our investment. Protecting your investment? I felt heat rising in my chest. My unsightly vessel is worth more than most of the cars in your parking lot. That's entirely beside the point. The issue is aesthetic compatibility and community standards. An elderly man in the front row raised his hand. Margaret, my grandson, loves watching the sailboats from our deck. What's wrong with a nice sailboat? Margaret's jaw tightened. Harold, we've discussed this. Individual preferences cannot override community standards established for the greater good. I looked around the room and saw a mix of confusion and annoyance on people's faces. These weren't tyrants. They were just regular homeowners who'd somehow elected a dictator to their board. Mrs. Whitmore, I said carefully, what exactly would make my boat compliant? She consulted her clipboard. Complete hull repainting in approved coastal colors, seafoam green or driftwood gray. Replacement of all chrome hardware with brushed nickel alternatives. And removal of all non-essential deck equipment that creates visual clutter. The room fell silent. Even Harold looked stunned. You're asking me to spend thousands of dollars to repaint a perfectly good boat because you don't like the color? I'm asking you to be a good neighbor and respect our community standards. As I left that meeting, rain beginning to patter against the windows, I heard Margaret tell her secretary to schedule a follow-up call with the County Code Enforcement Office. Something told me this was just the beginning of her campaign. The following Monday brought gray skies and the kind of persistent drizzle that makes everything at the marina feel damp and miserable. I'd barely finished securing my dock lines when I spotted two figures walking purposefully down the pier, Margaret and a man in a county inspector's uniform. Mr. Chen, Margaret's voice carried over the sound of halyards clanging in the wind. This is Inspector Rodriguez from the County Marine Safety Division. We've requested a full compliance inspection of your vessel. Inspector Rodriguez, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, approached my boat with obvious reluctance. Sir, I have to follow up on a complaint about potential safety violations. Mind if I take a look around? Of course not. I gestured toward my boat. She passed her last Coast Guard inspection with flying colors. As Rodriguez began his inspection, Margaret stood nearby with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. The inspector checked my fire extinguishers, flares, life jackets, and radio equipment with professional thoroughness. Everything looks good here, Rodriguez said after 20 minutes. All safety equipment is current and properly maintained. Margaret's face flushed. What about the fuel system? The electrical connections? Surely something isn't up to code. Rodriguez gave her a sharp look. Ma'am, this is one of the best maintained boats I've inspected this year. There are no violations. After they left, I thought the matter was settled. But that afternoon, Pete called me with disturbing news. Dave, you need to get down here. That HOA lady is back with some kind of environmental specialist. I arrived to find Margaret directing a woman in a lab coat as she collected water samples around my slip. The specialist had an expensive-looking testing kit and was methodically documenting everything with a digital camera. What's going on here? I demanded. Margaret barely looked up from her notes. Routine environmental monitoring. We're concerned that older boats might be leaching chemicals into the water. My boat was hauled and serviced 6 months ago. The bottom paint is brand new, and I use all biodegradable cleaning products. Nevertheless, we need to verify that your vessel isn't contributing to environmental degradation in our waterways." The environmental specialist finished her sampling and approached us. "I'll have the lab results in 3 to 5 business days," she told Margaret. "But I should mention, the water around this slip actually looks cleaner than the samples I took from the other end of the marina." Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Well, we'll see what the laboratory analysis reveals." As they walked away, I noticed Margaret making notes in what looked like a detailed plan of attack. Her harassment campaign was escalating, but I still had no idea she'd already contacted a maritime attorney about having my boat declared a public nuisance. The certified letter arrived on a Thursday morning that felt more like winter than late autumn. The wind howled across the harbor, rattling windows and sending seagulls wheeling inland. I tore open the envelope with growing dread. "Not ICEOFINTENTOSEEKINJUNCTIVERELAAF," read the letterhead from Coastal Legal Associates. The letter, signed by one attorney, Patricia Morse, informed me that the Harbor Point Homeowners Association intended to seek a court order declaring my boat a public nuisance and demanding its immediate removal from Marina Bay. They cited alleged environmental concerns, aesthetic violations, and claimed my presence was negatively impacting property values throughout their development. I was studying the legal jargon when my phone rang. "Mr. Chen? This is Patricia Morse from Coastal Legal. I understand you received our letter regarding your boat situation. I just read it. This is absolutely ridiculous. Mr. Chen, my client simply wants to resolve this matter amicably. If you voluntarily relocate your vessel to a marina outside their visual range, they're willing to withdraw the legal action. And if I refuse, then we'll proceed with the injunction. I should warn you, fighting this in court could be expensive and time-consuming. Even if you ultimately prevail, you'll likely spend more in legal fees than it would cost to simply move your boat." After hanging up, I sat in my cockpit, staring out at the choppy gray water. 23 years of peaceful mornings, 23 years of weekend sailing adventures, 23 years of considering this slip my home away from home. And Margaret Whitmore wanted to destroy all of that because she didn't like my boat's paint job. That evening, I called my old friend Marcus Rodriguez, not the inspector, but a real estate attorney I'd known since college. "Dave, this is pure harassment," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "The problem is, even frivolous lawsuits cost money to fight, and HOA cases can drag on for years. So I'm supposed to just give up? I'm not saying that. But you need to understand what you're up against. This Whitmore woman sounds like she's prepared to make your life miserable until she gets what she wants." That night, lying in my bunk, listening to the rain drumming on the cabin roof, I made a decision. Margaret Whitmore wanted a war. She was about to get one. But first, I needed to understand my enemy better. The next morning, I drove to the Harbor Point sales office. The receptionist, a cheerful young woman named Ashley, was happy to chat about the community. "Oh, Mrs. Whitmore," Ashley said when I mentioned the HOA president. "She's very dedicated to maintaining our standards. Actually, she's been trying to get the HOA to purchase Marina Bay for over a year now." My blood ran cold. Purchase Marina Bay? Something about wanting to control the entire waterfront experience. She says, having renters instead of homeowner-controlled slips hurts our property values. I thanked Ashley and left, my mind racing. This wasn't about my boat being an eyesore. This was about Margaret wanting to control the entire marina. And she was using me as a test case to see how far she could push before someone pushed back. But Margaret had no idea that her harassment campaign was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. I spent the weekend doing homework. Real homework. The kind that would make Margaret Whitmore wish she'd never heard of boat slips or HOA overreach. First stop, the county assessor's office. Marina Bay Properties, LLC owned the marina, and according to public records, they'd been trying to sell for 18 months. The asking price was listed as $2.8 million, recently reduced from $3.2 million. Next, I researched Margaret's Harbor Pointe Empire. Turned out the HOA had been in legal disputes with 3 other local businesses in the past 2 years: a restaurant, a small hotel, and a charter fishing operation. Each case followed the same pattern: claims about property values and aesthetic standards, followed by offers to resolve the matter amicably if the business agreed to the HOA's demands. The restaurant had caved and changed their outdoor seating design. The hotel had repainted their entire building. The charter operation had moved to a marina 20 miles up the coast. Margaret Whitmore wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was running a systematic campaign to control every business that Harbor Pointe residents could see from their waterfront homes. Monday morning found me sitting across from Tom Brennan, the owner of Marina Bay Properties, in his cluttered office overlooking the harbor. Coffee-stained charts covered the walls, and the air smelled of diesel fuel and old wood. "Dave, you've been one of our best tenants for years," Tom said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "This HOA nonsense is just the latest headache. They've been pressuring us for months." Ashley at the sales office mentioned Mrs. Whitmore wants to buy the marina. Tom snorted. She made an insulting lowball offer 6 months ago. $1.6 million for property that's assessed at over $3 million. When I turned her down, she started this campaign about problematic tenants and community standards. What if someone else made you a fair offer? Tom's eyes sharpened. "You know someone interested?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Maybe. What would you consider fair?" "For the right buyer? Someone who understands what this place means to people like you? I could probably do $2.4 million. That afternoon, I called my financial advisor. After 40 years as a software engineer, including 10 years with stock options at a startup that got acquired by Google, I'd accumulated what most people would consider serious money. Money I'd been saving for retirement adventures, world travel, maybe a bigger boat. Money that could buy a marina. "David, are you sure about this?" my advisor asked. "It's a significant investment, and marina management isn't exactly your area of expertise." "Jerry, I've been thinking about this backwards. Instead of asking whether I can afford to buy the marina, I should be asking whether I can afford not to. Margaret Whitmore is going to destroy this place if someone doesn't stop her." The paperwork took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Margaret escalated her harassment campaign to include having the fire marshal inspect my boat, no violations found, requesting the Coast Guard perform an unscheduled boarding, again, no problems, and filing a formal complaint with the county about my illegal liveaboard status, which I wasn't claiming anyway. Each failed attempt seemed to make her more determined and more careless. But Margaret's biggest mistake was underestimating exactly who she was dealing with. The closing was scheduled for Friday morning at the title company's office. I'd told nobody except Tom Brennan and my attorney about the purchase, planning to surprise Margaret with the news after everything was finalized. But Thursday afternoon brought a surprise of my own. I was organizing paperwork in my cabin when Pete knocked on my hull. "Dave, that HOA lady is here again." But this time, she brought back up. I climbed topside to find Margaret standing on the dock with 2 men in expensive suits. One looked like a lawyer, the other like the kind of person who made unpleasant problems disappear. "Mr. Chen," Margaret announced, her voice carrying a note of triumph I hadn't heard before. "I'd like you to meet Thomas Whitmore, my husband, and his business partner, Mr. Sullivan." Thomas Whitmore was a tall, silver-haired man with the kind of confident bearing that comes from decades of getting his way. Sullivan was younger, broader, with the dead eyes of someone who enjoyed intimidation. "Mr. Chen," Thomas said, extending his hand, "I understand you've been having some difficulties with our homeowners association. Actually, your wife has been harassing me for 2 months." Sullivan stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Chen, sometimes fighting a battle isn't worth the cost, even if you think you might win." The threat hung in the air like fog rolling in from the harbor. These people weren't just HOA tyrants. They were something much worse. "How much time do I have to think about it?" 24 hours, Thomas said. "We'll be back tomorrow afternoon for your answer." As they walked away, I heard Margaret tell her husband, by Saturday, this whole marina will be under our control. What she didn't know was that by Saturday morning, I'd be signing the papers that made me her new landlord. Friday morning dawned crystal clear, with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes every color seem more vivid. I dressed carefully for the closing navy blazer, pressed khakis, boat shoes. The uniform of a man about to make the most expensive statement of his life. The title company's conference room smelled like leather chairs and legal documents. Tom Brennan looked nervous but hopeful as we reviewed the final paperwork with our attorneys present. Marina Bay Properties, LLC, hereby transfers all assets, including real property, structures, dock systems, and current tenant agreements, to David Chen, the closing agent read from the final documents. I signed my name with the kind of satisfaction that comes from solving a puzzle nobody else even knew existed. "Congratulations, Mr. Chen. You now own Marina Bay." Tom shook my hand with genuine warmth. "Dave, I know you'll take good care of this place. And I hope you give that HOA witch exactly what she deserves." At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was back at my boat, now technically my own tenant, when I spotted the Whitmore entourage returning. Margaret walked with the confident stride of someone expecting total victory. Thomas looked impatient, like a man who had bigger deals waiting. Sullivan kept scanning the marina like he expected trouble. They found me sitting in my cockpit, apparently reading a magazine. "Well, Mr. Chen," Thomas announced as they approached, "what's your decision?" I looked up from my magazine, which was actually the marina's new owner manual, and smiled. "My decision is that I'm not going anywhere." Margaret's face darkened. "Then you'll deal with the consequences. We'll have your boat towed by Monday." "I'm curious," I said, standing slowly. "Exactly who's going to authorize that towing?" "The marina management, obviously," Thomas said. "Once we explain the situation, they'll be happy to cooperate." "You might want to check with the marina management first." Something in my tone must have alerted them, because all three faces suddenly showed uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" Margaret demanded. I reached into my cabin and pulled out a folder of documents. "Well, as of this morning, I am the marina management. I bought Marina Bay." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear water lapping against hulls 3 slips away. Margaret was the first to recover. "You're lying." I handed her the deed. Marina Bay Properties, LLC, sold to David Chen for $2.4 million. Closed at 10:15 this morning. Thomas snatched the document from his wife's trembling hands. As he read, his face went through an interesting series of expressions: disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked like grudging respect. "This is impossible," Margaret whispered. "We were going to buy this place." "No, you were going to steal this place with lowball offers and harassment campaigns." "There's a difference." Sullivan stepped forward with his customary menace. "Mr. Chen, you may own the marina, but you still have to follow county regulations. We can make your life very difficult." I opened my folder and pulled out another document. Funny thing about county regulations. When you own waterfront property, you get to review all the complaints filed against your tenants, including these 17 bogus reports your wife filed in the past 2 months. Margaret's face went pale. Those were legitimate concerns about a boat that passed every single inspection you demanded, which means you filed false reports with county agencies. That's a misdemeanor in this state. Thomas grabbed his wife's arm. Margaret, we're leaving. Oh, but we're not done yet, I called out as they turned to go. See, as the new Marina owner, I need to revise some of our policies. They stopped and turned back. I pulled out a freshly printed document. New Marina rules, effective immediately. All waterfront property owners whose homes are visible from marina slips must now comply with our marine aesthetic standards. Margaret's mouth fell open. You can't do that. Actually, I can. If waterfront views impact property values, then it works both ways. Your bright yellow house, for instance, is clearly visible from 17 different boat slips. Very disruptive to our peaceful marina environment. Thomas stepped closer. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying your house needs to be repainted in marina-approved colors. Soft blues or weathered grays only, and those gaudy white columns will have to go. They create too much visual clutter. This is ridiculous. Oh, and there's more. Your dock extends into waters that affect our marina's sightlines. It'll need to be rebuilt to marina specifications. Estimated cost, about $30,000. Margaret found her voice. We'll sue you. Go ahead. I've got 2.4 million reasons to fight back, and a very good attorney who specializes in harassment cases. But the real coup de grace was still coming. I smiled at their stunned faces. There is, however, one way to resolve this amicably. The wind had picked up, sending small whitecaps dancing across the harbor as I delivered the final blow to Margaret's empire of petty tyranny. Here's my offer, I continued, savoring every word. The Harbor Point HOA can purchase a Marina Aesthetic Compliance Agreement for the low price of $150 per month per waterfront home. Thomas did quick math in his head. That's nearly $4,000 a month for our entire development. Actually, it's $4,700 a month. There are 31 homes with water views. Margaret finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. You can't charge us for looking at your marina. The same way you couldn't charge me for keeping my boat in a marina that wasn't part of your HOA. But you tried anyway. I pulled out one more document, the piece de resistance I'd been saving. Of course, there is one other option. I'd be willing to waive all aesthetic compliance fees for any HOA that agrees to dissolve its overreach policies and stops harassing marina tenants. Thomas studied my face carefully. And if we don't agree to either option, then every month I'll find new ways to make your waterfront living experience complicated. Maybe I'll start hosting weekend fishing tournaments, organize sailing regattas, perhaps rent slips to some of those party boats from the next county over. The beauty of the moment was watching Margaret realize she'd been outmaneuvered by her own tactics. Every weapon she'd used against me could now be turned against her and her precious homeowners association. You planned this whole thing, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Margaret. You planned this whole thing. I just played better defense than you expected. Sullivan, who'd been quietly observing the entire exchange, stepped forward one last time. Mr. Chen, you might want to be careful about making enemies. I looked him straight in the eye. The difference between you and me is that I'm not making enemies, I'm defending myself. And I've got security cameras covering every inch of this marina, plus a very good relationship with the Sheriff's Marine Patrol unit. Thomas grabbed his wife's elbow. We're done here. Margaret, we're leaving. As they walked away, Margaret turned back once. This isn't over. Actually, I called out. "It is over. The old Marina Bay, where you could push people around, is closed permanently. Welcome to the new management." The spring morning was perfect for sailing, with a steady breeze from the southwest and not a cloud in the sky. I was rigging my boat for a day on the water when Pete approached with the morning mail and a satisfied grin. "Dave, you gotta see this." He handed me an envelope with a Harbor Point HOA return address. Inside was a formal letter of apology from the newly elected HOA board, along with a check for $250 reimbursement for the bogus fine Margaret had tried to impose months earlier. Turns out, Margaret's harassment campaign wasn't too popular with the other homeowners once they found out about it, Pete explained. She lost the board presidency in a landslide, and 3 other members resigned in protest of her tactics. I looked across the marina, where a dozen boats gleamed in their slips, their owners preparing for weekend adventures without fear of random inspections or bogus citations. The new normal I'd fought to protect. "Any word on where the Whitmores ended up?" Pete chuckled. "Rumor is they moved to a gated community about 50 miles inland. No water views whatsoever." That afternoon, as I sailed past the Harbor Point development, I noticed something interesting. Several homeowners were out on their decks, waving at the boats passing by. A few kids were learning to fish from the community dock. Without Margaret's reign of terror, people were actually enjoying their waterfront lifestyle instead of worrying about compliance violations and aesthetic standards. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Brennan. "Dave, saw the article in the Harbor Tribune about the new community sailing program you're starting. Count me in as a volunteer instructor." The article he mentioned was part of my plan to turn Marina Bay into something Margaret never could have imagined, not just a place to store boats, but a real community hub where people could learn about sailing, marine conservation, and the simple joy of being on the water. Because here's what Margaret Whitmore never understood: the best way to protect property values isn't to drive away the things that make waterfront living special. It's to embrace them. 6 months after becoming marina owner, I was reviewing the monthly financial reports when I noticed something interesting in the slip rental applications. Marina Bay was not only fully booked for the first time in 3 years, but we had a waiting list of 47 boats. Property values in Harbor Point had indeed changed. They'd gone up 12%, making it one of the most desirable waterfront communities on the coast. The phone rang as I was celebrating this news with my evening coffee. "Mr. Chen, this is Patricia Morse from Coastal Legal Associates. I represented the HOA in your previous disagreement. I remembered the attorney who'd threatened me with injunctions and legal fees. What can I do for you, Miss Morse?" "Well, this is somewhat awkward, but I'm calling on behalf of a new client. I have a boat owner in the next county who's being harassed by his HOA, and he'd like to discuss your innovative approach to the problem." I almost choked on my coffee. "Are you asking me for advice on fighting HOA overreach?" "Mr. Chen, what you accomplished here has become something of a legend in maritime law circles. We've had 3 other cases where property owners have successfully used your model to push back against unreasonable HOA demands." After hanging up, I walked out to the end of the main dock and looked back at Marina Bay. The evening light painted everything in shades of gold and amber: the boats, the water, the satisfied faces of people enjoying their slice of waterfront paradise. Margaret Whitmore had wanted to control this place, to turn it into just another extension of her perfectly regulated, soul-crushingly uniform development. Instead, she'd accidentally inspired me to create something better: a marina where people could enjoy their boats without fear, where kids could learn to sail, where the community could gather for sunset barbecues and impromptu fishing contests. The best revenge, it turns out, isn't just defeating your enemies, it's using their attack to build something so much better than what they tried to destroy that even they benefit from it in the end. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully isn't to fight fire with fire, but to fight fire with water. Margaret Whitmore came at me with harassment, intimidation, and petty power plays. I responded with ownership, community building, and the kind of patience that comes from having both the resources and the moral high ground. The Marina is thriving, the community is happier, and somewhere 50 miles inland, Margaret Whitmore is probably trying to regulate her neighbors' mailbox heights or hedge trimming schedules. As for me, I'm exactly where I started in Slip 47, drinking morning coffee on my boat, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the hull. The only difference is that now, when someone storms down the dock with a clipboard and delusions of authority, they're coming to ask permission instead of demand compliance. And that makes all the difference in the world.